leaving that standard for the next generation to know, like, hey, we're not going to compromise on these things. I don't care what everybody else has done. I don't care what the generation before you did. We're going to be different. What do you want your legacy to be?
Me? Or the general population of Pointman?
No, you. What do you want if you had to give an elevator pitch to someone about you and what you desire your legacy to be when you're gone, what do you want it to be? Today we're talking about a man and his legacy. Legacy is a broad term, but for today's context of conversation, I want us to boil it down to simply what we leave behind when we pass on.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to start. I know a lot of times people will be like, "Well, I remember my grandpa because of this reasons," and to be remembered or to remember something is kind of what leaving a legacy is about. What people remember about you as a man.
I think the context of the legacy we leave behind has to kind of be categorized a little bit. So, I think a lot of times we do think to our grandparents or our parents and the things that they passed down to us. A lot of times, though, a legacy could be a legacy of success that they had that we can profit off of or that we can be benefited by. I think, too, a lot of times legacy seems to be categorized for those of wealth and those of influence and time. When you think about legacy, people will name buildings after themselves, or their families will name buildings after themselves, or statues will be built for great acts that are done. And the reason that those are done is so that people down the line can remember the legacy of the person who did the work or whatever the action was, to leave a legacy through this naming, through the statue erection, whatever it might be. But we each are going to leave some form of legacy behind when we leave. And really the main question is, what does that look like? What does our legacy look like when we leave this earth?
Yeah, that's good. I've been thinking about that a lot lately. I just recently turned 30.
Yeah.
Some people might not be like, well, he looks old because he's bald and he's got a lot of kids. But I'm like, yeah, turning 30, it really did make me think a lot about my life. And I think maybe it's kind of a turning point in your life, a big turning point, because before you're 30, you're like, man, I got forever. I'm going to live forever. Not really worried about what I'm going to leave behind because I'm still trying to figure out my life. And I think at the moment when you turn 30, at least for me, I don't know if it's the same case for you whenever you did turn 30, but it's like,
old dude.
I want to know, like, if when you get past, there's a certain point in your life where you're like, well, I need to think about the future. And not only when I get a little older, like what my kids are going to think about me or what people will think about me in general, but also in the next your generations after you. It comes into a thought a lot. And before I turned 30, I didn't think about that at all.
Well, you start thinking about, there's two sides to that coin, though. And you start to get a little older, you start to think about, am I doing things in my life that have value and reason? Is there a benefit for me doing the things I'm doing in my life? But I think, too, we can also fall into, crap, I'm 30. That dude's 35 and he's doing incredible things already. And I haven't even, I'm still trying to figure out how to get going and get started. And you start to look at him and you're like, oh, his legacy is going to be, we don't put it in those terms, but we start looking and we're like, he's doing so much more than I'm doing. Why am I not doing that? What am I doing wrong that I'm not able to obtain the same things that guy is 5 years older than me? He started when he was 25. I'm 30. I've already screwed up. I'm already behind the 8 ball, and it's not true. It's not true at all. We talked about statues. A legacy can be laid out in stories. The stories of the things your parents did. I mean, past that, we walked uphill in the snow both ways to get to school type stuff. But, you hear the great things that they did for people. A lot of times we hear them at funerals. That's when all of every great thing they've ever done in their entire life is shared at funerals. And it's the stories that they left for us to remember them by. But I think for us, our standards are really where our legacy should be focused as men. And when we start talking about standards as a legacy, you remove the time aspect. You've already probably screwed up the standard. So the fact of looking backwards and saying, man, I don't have enough time now. You 100% do. And the things that you're doing in your life, if you do them by this standard or you uphold a standard with your life, that's the legacy that's going to be passed on to your kids that they're going to be like, my dad never compromised on X, Y, or Z. In the Old Testament, you see it a couple of places. Psalm 78 verse 4 says, "We will not hide from their children, but tell the coming generation the glorious deeds of the Lord and his might and the wonders that he has done." This is them talking about them overcoming the falsehood of a previous generation who hid from God's standard. And so their legacy they left behind was simply that of, the church word would be apostate, but this like false doctrine that had been left behind by a generation who were unwilling to continue the standard that God had given them. This verse is saying, we're not going to hide that from the next generation of people. Our kids are going to know the hardship. They're going to know the hard things, the dark things, the struggles that our people have been through. But they're also going to know how God was glorious through those things and how the wonders that he has done for our people. And that's essentially this. That's leaving that standard for the next generation to know, like, hey, we're not going to compromise on these things. I don't care what everybody else has done. I don't care what the generation before you did. We're going to be different. And we're going to act different, and we're going to think different, and we're going to, generally just be different from those who came before us. That's a legacy. 100%. That's a lasting legacy that has a great impact, not just on you and your family, but, the family that comes from you. Yeah,
I was thinking about legacy just very recently as well, and thinking about how you are going to leave a legacy even if you don't want to. A lot of times if you're like, I don't care about leaving a legacy, you're going to leave one, but it might not be the legacy you want or should want to leave. Might leave a bad legacy. I was listening to a podcast this past week, and he talked about how you're like, well, my legacy is my work, right? How much I work, and like you could get tied up into that and your work, and you would say, well, I need to work more hours and more hours. But a lot of times people were like, people don't remember how much you worked, but the people who do remember how much you worked is your wife and your kids, and they're going to remember that for the rest of their lives. And so I think about that a lot lately, and I'm like, man, I want to be the guy who was like, he was the guy who cared about his family more than he cared about his job, because your kids are going to remember that even when they're passed on. They're like, well, what was your dad like? Or what was your mom like? And you're like, well, he was always at work. I have no clue. He wasn't around. He didn't come to my sporting events. He didn't care to be in my life. And so a lot of times people will be like, well, I don't necessarily care about my legacy, but you are leaving one even if you don't want to, and it might not be a positive one.
Yeah, that's true. And, just as we're designed with the ability to create a future, your work, the things that you're going through, we selfishly want that future to matter. And you're making a decision at that point. What is your legacy? My legacy was I'm the best at X, or my legacy is that I cared for my kids. I cared for my family. I helped them grow, which comes back to a standard of life that you leave behind for them. And so, I think you're a good example, just with your family structure. Your dad left a legacy. He's still with us, but your dad will leave a legacy that he was someone who cared about God and cared about his family and was invested in both. And that's something that you have taken from it, obviously. And it's something that I'm sure that you're working to instill in your kids too, as they grow up. But that keeps passing down. I can look at times, where I left probably a bad taste in my kid's mouth, my oldest kid, because I did or something, or I compromised in some way that he, may have taken the wrong thing from. Like, if I was to die today, he'd be like, yeah, I love my dad. He was probably a good dude. But there were times where he was a jerk. Like, I can honestly say that because I know the things I've said and done. And, all you can do at that point is to change today. I mean, it's a 180. It's like, your kids may not trust the new way that you are at first, but it's still worth changing. It's still worth moving in that direction to care about them and to love them. And I say all of that to not discredit the legacy that can be left by great work too, because I don't think that it's mutually exclusive. I don't think that you can not be a great success in a field and also not be a great dad, because you 100% can. It's not that you have to throw this thing to the side away. But when we start looking at it, it's, the things that we do for an occupation, the things that we do that bring us glory personally, through the work that we can accomplish, that's limited to us. And so when we leave, that doesn't transfer to the next generation. They just like, yeah, my dad made a lot of money. It's cool. Yep. We got some money out of it when he died, but like, we go remember him at the statue every now and then. But
the building that was named after him.
Yeah, we're happy about that. We were there when they cut the ribbon and all, but at the end of the day, that's not benefiting the kid in the same way that if you were attentive to, and you can do both. Yep. It's definitely possible. It's about intentionality. It's about focus and doing those things. But the legacy that we leave through our offspring and to our kids is just vitally important. And, I'll say this too, if you don't have kids, it's not that you're discredited from this thought. No. Paul, 2 Corinthians 9:10, Paul speaks of how in his weakness on earth, his weakness here, the shortcomings he had, created a platform for the revelation of God's power. And so through that, his shortcomings, the things he wasn't strong in, God was able to use those as a stepping stone and a platform for glory for others. Paul doesn't have a family. He doesn't have an offspring to care for, but he still was able to leave a legacy. I mean, clearly, for sure, half this book is written by him, but because of that, his legacy lived on as a man of faith who impacted a great number of people and continues to impact a great number of people. But it wasn't because he was this great orator and writer, which he was, but that's not the reason. The reason was because he was humbled by his work and was willing to share that with other people, and his legacy followed that. Yeah.
Speaking of my father, where he is definitely a guy who cares about other people, and he cared about us as well. Still does. Still alive. So he got that, I believe, from my grandfather, who instilled it to him. And so, like you're saying, that's the legacy that I think it's more important than anything, is leaving that for your family and them carrying it on as well. Because, like you said, I'm going to try to do the same. But like at my grandpa's funeral, there was about, thousands of people there just because of the life that he lived, and tried to emulate that best I could. All the stories about him were always great. I'm sure he wasn't always, doing things he was supposed to, but
he said something to somebody at some point that was wrong. 100%.
Yes. And I always hear the stories about like where he'd be during his older life, he would be like witnessing to the waitresses at the he's like, hey, where are you going to spend your eternity? He would just ask the waitress, and you're like, I just thought it's cool that that's the legacy that in my brain that I'm left with about him. But it also brings me back to, like you're saying, it's not just about your kids. It's also about the things that you do, stories that will be remembered. When I go back to remember a lot of things in the Bible, I think about the time where Mary and Martha were with Jesus, and one of them was cleaning and the other one was sitting there listening to Jesus. And Jesus says, you should be here listening and paying attention, because this story of her listening and paying attention is going to be remembered forever. That's her legacy, that she sat there and with Jesus and it didn't lose her sight on Jesus. I think that's a big thing, where it's like not only what you can pass down to the next generation, but the things you do could and can be remembered for a long time.
Yeah, 100%. I said something in a message or something one time where, one of the things that we want is we want to be remembered. Just broadly. We're not even thinking about legacy. We just want the things that we do to matter. We want to be remembered. And the people who are insignificant in my life, I don't remember. I mean, I don't mean that in a harsh way. I just mean that in the way of, like, if I'm walking down the street and we have no interaction, I don't remember you. I just move on. If you have a terrible impact on me,
you're gonna be remembered.
I remember you. I remember you because you were terrible. But if you have a good impact or a great impact on my life, I remember you for the greatness or the greatness of the thing that you did in my life. And, that's both of those, bad or good, is a legacy that you'll leave behind, maybe even to just one individual person and one person that you impacted or interacted with. And that really changes the way that you think about interactions. It changes the way that you think about the way you talk to people, act towards people, the things you're willing to do for people. It changes everything, but it's true. And that's what we remember. Yeah. We remember the things that had great impact.
Yeah. So speaking of that, I was active duty Air Force for 6 years before I got out and joined the Guard. But I was at a different church when I was stationed in Mississippi, and there was this lady who ran our Bible study. She was like, I'm scared to do Bible study, but I'm just going to do one. And me and JC just randomly happened to go to her Bible study. The way she ran it was awesome. She wasn't like some sort of church person, or she was just like, I'm going to show up, read my Bible, and be at Bible study. But the way she did it, I really enjoyed, and I gathered a lot from that. And I was able to use that Bible study, and I was speaking with Karen, who leads our small group communities here at that church, and she was like, you want to come in and talk to everyone here about how you run your small group. And I was like, I just copied this lady that I knew down in Biloxi, and so I got the chance to teach a lot of people the way she led her Bible study. And I got the chance a couple of years later, it was like 6 years later, I had some training that I had to go back down there for, and I actually got to speak to her, and she was like, I was telling her about like, hey, you taught me how to do this Bible study, and I was able to teach it to, there was like probably 50 people at this community group training that we were doing. And she was like, man, she was just bawling her eyes out. She was like, man, that was so good. She's like, I had no clue that like the impact that I had on you in that moment. So I just think about a lot of times where in your life, you might not think you're having an impact or a legacy that you're leaving, but sometimes you are, even though you might not believe that you are.
Yeah,
leaving impact.
It's 100%.
Yeah.
So I want to look like a flip side. We've talked a lot of like how to avoid the pitfalls of a negative and kind of establishing a legacy. There's a story in the Bible that's one of my favorites, and it's the ascension of Elijah. I love the entire Elijah saga in 1st and 2nd Kings, but there's a point of transfer of power essentially in the story, and it comes in 2nd Kings chapter 2, and Elisha is following Elijah, and Elijah's like, you should stop here, and he was like, wherever you go, I'm going to go. And it happens multiple times. And then more people come and they're like, you should stop here. And he's like, wherever Elijah's going to go, I'm going to go. And in verse 10, it says this, he says, and he said, you have asked a hard thing, yet if you see me and I am being taken from you, it shall be so for you. But if you do not see me, it shall not be so. He's asked for Elijah to provide him a double portion of the power that God has provided Elijah. And this is after he's already told him to stop. So it's not like he sees the treacherous road ahead and is like, if you can survive, you will get a double portion. It's not that. He's already told him, like, stop. Like, don't follow me any longer. And Elisha refuses. And we get to the point where the chariots come. Elijah is taking up in a whirlwind. Elisha remains on earth, picks up the cloak of Elijah, and strikes the water that Elijah had struck. Elijah struck it, the water parted, they were able to walk across it. Elisha picks it up, strikes it again, the water parts, and the transfer of power is given to Elisha, not a relative. This is a separate person who has followed him. This isn't someone that's in his house.
Confusing because sometimes people get confused and it's very similar name.
Yeah.
J becomes before S. That's how I remember it.
Yeah, that's good too.
Elisha.
It also kind of falls into the same time periods of when names change.
Yes.
So you could be reading through and be like, oh, this is the same guy. No, different dude. But God provided the son the younger because of the faithfulness of the older and his willingness to follow the older. And, you talked about the story of Mary and Martha and her listening to Jesus, and her legacy was her listening and learning, and Jesus rewarded that in that moment. And for us, when we are around someone who is doing something incredible, we have to be willing to follow those people who are doing incredible things. Part of building a legacy is, of course, the things that we can create, the things that we can design, but we can also benefit from the legacy of those who come before us. And people can benefit or be detrimented from following us and the things that we are doing. And so we have to be cognizant in both directions of who are those people that we're around and the things that they're leaving behind that we're picking up. And for him, it was a wonderful moment. I mean, obviously he's stricken with like grief that Elijah is gone now, but he goes to strike it and the same thing happens. And clearly it's an example of the power was given to Elisha to continue the work that Elijah did. And he even goes to the people, and the people recognize and honor the fact that the power had come to Elisha from Elijah, and they honor him in a similar way that they would have honored Elijah in the first place, which is an incredible thing.
Yeah, so you're saying his legacy was following Elijah is what you're saying. Is like he's trying to follow after his legacy. And that's what
I think it's more that Elijah leaves an incredible legacy of faith. There's issues. We have a whole episode if you go back and watch it on Elijah and his shortcomings. But the work he did for God, his diligence for God, the power that God gave him to overcome obstacles and to trials and to show signs and wonders and to battle enemies and all these things that he does. It's an incredible story. And Elisha asked for a double portion of what Elijah had, and he only would have known that if he had been following and listening and growing with Elijah to ask for. He doesn't ask for to go with him. He doesn't ask for to be his replacement. He asks to be a better version, essentially, to double the glory that God had given him. And that gives us, when we take from a legacy of someone who's older than us, if it's a dad or if it's a mentor, if it's just somebody a friend, and you have a starting point that's already elevated above others. And now your job is to build a legacy from that starting point. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. It reminds me a lot of, probably just because I've been reading in Kings and Chronicles about David and his passing on his legacy to his son Solomon, where he not only did he pass on the kingship, but he also said that David wanted to build the temple and he couldn't. And he had his son do it. His son carried on his legacy of building the temple for God. He collected a lot of the materials, but he actually passed it on to Solomon to build the temple. And it just made me think a lot about that, probably just because I've been reading that lately, and it just reminded me of it. But yeah, Solomon was actually the one able to build the temple for God, even though David wanted to do it, but his legacy was left for his son to finish. So that's something I feel like we can think about as well. Is like you might start something, but the future generations could be the ones who carry it on and to finish.
I think Moses is a great example. Moses has this great story of the Exodus story of leading the Israelite people to the Holy Land. He screws up. Yeah. And so his story stops right there. And it's Joshua that crosses over. It's the one who came after him. And, sometimes, even at the end of doing a great thing, the job's not done. Yep. And you have to continue to maintain your focus. Yeah,
I think about that sometimes too, where I know my son Reese, he literally watches every single thing I do, and he wants to do every single thing I do. And I think you just do that because it's your parent, and that's what your dad's the coolest person in the whole world when you're growing up, and you want to copy every single thing they do. But he'll do the things that I enjoy that him doing is like wearing the things that I like to wear, or just says something funny the way I say it because he wants to copy his dad. But also sometimes at home I'll lose my temper and I'll yell or do something that I shouldn't do in the moment. I'm like, he's watching these things that I'm doing. And like you said, where Moses jacked it up, Joshua probably tried to say, well, I don't want to do that, but he did see that happen. So I tried to my best not to leave that legacy where on the decks, sometimes he could lose his temper. And I'm like, I'm jacked it up. But, try your best every day to not leave the bad legacies like we were talking about earlier with Moses hitting a rock when he was supposed to do.
Just talk to it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's one of those things, as men, we believe here that men are the head of the household and that where they go, the family follows. Of course, we could go through all the statistics that we talk about all the time, but it's true. And so the things that you're passing down to your kids are going to be taken at a higher acceptance rate than that of their mom. And, not to disparage women's role, but it's just true. And so for us, we definitely have to keep a keen eye. And, just think about the friends you had. I don't know if you're this way. I had some wild friends. Yep. And, there's those friends that I had that to this day, there's no chance I'm taking my kids to their house. It could be for a cookout. There's nothing else going on, but you never know when they're just going to do something stupid. That is imprinted in my brain for those people. Yep. And I'm never going to forget it. And I'm never going to take my kids to their house because you never know what's going to happen. Yep. But that thing that they've instilled in so many people stuck. And so that's just, they live that way. Now, they still need to do the 180 and change, but it's going to be really hard. I mean, that's the standard that you have set for your life. And, for us, we have the same thing. You want your kids to want to be like you, but you want to be proud of the thing that they become too. And so if they're not becoming something that you're proud of, it's possibly that you set a standard so low that they weren't able to uphold your vision for their life, if that makes sense. Not that that's our whole job, but you still want it. You still want your kids to be a better version of you. How much better? How low do they have to go to start to get above you? Erwin McManus had a quote one time, and I'm going to butcher it or paraphrase it, but essentially it was talking about submission of his wife. He said, I want to set it. I think he compared it to an umbrella, and he was like, I want it to be that I hold the standard so high that my wife doesn't have to kneel to get under it. And that standard goes to our kids too. It goes to our spouses. It goes to everybody around us. Like, we want to uphold a standard so high that if somebody wants to walk under it, they just walk right through, that they don't have to labor to be lower than where we've set the bar itself. And when we leave this place, my prayer for my kids, and, for my oldest one, I hope he sees a change, and I hope that he sees growth and that he understands that he can grow and be a better person. For my younger one, I hope he never has to deal with it. I hope that he grows up his whole life understanding that we have a high bar for what it means to live life, and to the standard that God gave us, his Bible, his word, what that looks like for us, and that he's willing to walk in that his whole life, and he doesn't have to question it.
I've seen the changes from the few years that I've known you, so I'm 100% sure that your oldest son has as well. But I was thinking about when you were talking about like hanging out with you wouldn't let your friends hang out with wouldn't let your kids hang out with your old friends. And I think a lot of times where I have friends out there, or old friends, especially like high school and soon after high school, where they'd be like, "You're doing a Christian podcast?" Like, what is this guy doing? What is this guy doing a Christian podcast? But yeah, so I wouldn't take my kids to hang out with some of those guys either. But if they're listening, I hope you do come to Jesus, and I always pray for you guys. So yeah, hopefully you turn it around. But yeah, I was in that same boat that you're talking about. Like, yeah, we had some sketchy friends back in the day as well. I
think everybody on the other side of that camera has some sketchy friends that they could name,
either current or past. Yeah, for sure.
I still have some, but I ain't taking my kids.
Yeah, you don't let them. Yeah, you don't let them influence you, or you're letting your kids letting them babysit your kids. So
yeah, it seems very dad focused today, but it's not the whole point. The whole point is that I hope that I can leave a high standard. That my legacy is that I did what God had asked me to do. I did it to the best of my ability, and that because of that, I was able to positively impact people around me.
Yeah, I was hoping we could maybe discuss as well, maybe if you don't have that legacy currently, or if you're wanting to make some small changes to be able to have that legacy that you wish you would have. What are some like maybe practical or some real life examples that we could discuss about how to start making that, where that guy, he actually did live a legacy that I wanted to live. So let's make our way towards that.
Yeah, I think if you're sitting there and you're like, I'm not living up to what I think I should. First thing I would do is I would sit down and I would write down the shortcomings. So let's just be honest with ourselves. It's you between you. You don't have to share it with the whole world, but sit down and write down where am I coming up short. Make a list of 10. If it's a list of 100, make a list of 100. I believe it's AA, maybe one of the anonymous groups. I believe that they do this. That they kind of write down the things that they're kind of repentful for. I could be wrong, so my AA friends can tell me later. But I believe that they do this, but I think it's good because it's a self inventory of, all right, I got a foul mouth. Write it down.
Write it down.
And then today, make today the day you quit using foul language. Yeah. I got a drinking problem. I'll write it down. Be like, okay, I'm going to get help today for my drinking problem. I guarantee if you start writing these key things down that are harming the legacy that you will leave behind, you'll start to see that some of these things build on one another. I have foul language. My kid has foul language. They're getting in trouble at school. Okay, so where did we start? We start with you quit saying it at home, or period, but at home around them at least, and maybe talk to them about theirs and just be honest with them. Some of the times with my oldest son, if I said something or did something that I regretted, I would go to him later and I would just apologize to him. Straightforward, be like, look, that's not right. That's not how we do this. I'm sorry that I said that. I shouldn't have said that. And I think that goes a lot further than we think it does. We think as parents that or as people, it's not your kid. If you did it to somebody else, go to them and just be like, hey, I'm sorry, this is not right. I should not have said that or done that. That goes a long way, because that person will see, like, one, they recognize that you understood that you screwed something up, but two, you know, that you cared enough about them to point it out. I think that goes a long way. But if you start to write these things down, you'll start to see some building on each other. I got a drinking problem. I cuss a lot because I drink a lot. And I'm gone all the time from my kids because I can't get home from the bar because they're, you know, like, these things happen. And I think you'll start to see that, like, those key things in your life that are really harming the legacy that you leave behind, if you can start chipping those off and finding the help for those that you need, that you'll be able to start to work through some of those things on a personal level. And the things that you need help with, seek help through them. Like, I hate the term normalize, but let's normalize the fact that you might need help.
Yeah, so I actually been thinking about this a lot lately as well. A lot of the times in my life where I'm like, man, I'm set in stone in the way I think, and I'm set in stone in the way that I do things. And I've had to come with the grips lately with the things I think are not always correct. The things I do are not always correct. And that's something that I think a lot of people out there in the world have the same mindset, where it's like, I'm locked in. This is what I learned when I grew up. You know, these are the things that I was taught. I'm not changing from them. And it's crazy to think that it might not be right. It's not always correct. And if you kind of can shift your mind away from, like, I don't think, I was taught this way about the Bible. I'm like, that's not correct. Mm-hmm. And if you can kind of make those little mindset changes where it was like, humble yourself and be like, okay, well, I might not be right on this. Take someone else's advice, try it out. But like, a lot of the times whenever you think like, I'm set in stone, I'm a person, like you say, quote unquote, to yourself, I'm a person who drinks, like you were saying earlier. I'm a person who has a problem with my anger. I would say whenever you're writing your things down, your list of things that you think you need to work on, at the bottom, make an I am statement. I don't know if you've heard of this before. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
I know Pastor Craig says this a lot about your habits. I am a person who doesn't cuss. Write it down. Even if you don't believe it yourself, you might internally think you grew up, I'm a person who cusses. I'm a person who uses foul language. Write down, I'm a person who doesn't cuss. Next time you go to say a cuss word or comes up, you're like, well, I'm a person who doesn't cuss. So in this situation, I'm not going to cuss. And so I think if you, like you're saying, write those things down that you were trying to work on, and then make some I am statements at the bottom to change those bad behaviors, those hate behaviors you want to change yourself, to get away from doing those things that you don't want to do. I'm not a person who watches rated R movies. Write it down. A rated R movie comes up on Netflix. You're like, I'm not a person who watches these movies, so I'm going to go to the next PG-13 movie, whatever the case is, PG, if you got kids.
Yeah, whatever it is in your life that you need shifting through. Yeah, I think that's good. You know, one of the things you said about you might have to change the way you think about certain things. A trick or a tool I use is if I'm listening to someone teach on something, I will regularly find myself where I'll be listening to someone teach on something that I already have thought or
you're closed off, you're gated, you're not changing your mind on that.
But what I do on it is I write notes as if everything they say is true, and that everything they say is right, no matter my thoughts on it.
Before you continue, how did you adopt this? Because that's not a normal thing that people do. Most people are gated, and it doesn't matter what you say, you're not breaking in. So what changed your mind on that?
One, a lot of times I would respect the speaker enough that I thought there might be a nugget of truth in what they were saying. And so I would hear them speak on something else. I'm like, it was a great thought. I agree with them on that. And then I would see like another video, or I'd be at a conference and I'd see them, like their list would be a new thing, a new topic. And I would just when they start speaking, I start writing notes as if what they're going to say next is absolutely true. I leave all thought at the door. And then when I get done with the conversation, I go back and I reread them. And I'm like, okay, here's why this is wrong. Here's the proof for that. That's a good thought. I never thought about it that way. Circle it. Now that's my thought on that. You know, like there's things like that. And I would go through, and I have 1,000 of these little notebooks just full of crap like this. And I would just go through them, and the things that I would adopt new thoughts on things because I would hear them take a new perspective on it. Or sometimes you just hear stuff that's stupid. You know, let's be honest. Sometimes people are just dumb, and in those moments you just leave it alone. But I try to, and a lot of it came too from my work in the insurance world. Like we'd be in a meeting about how to process something, and I have my way of doing it, and so my way works for me. They're wanting us to do a different way, and I would listen to their thoughts on why. And sometimes there were things like, oh, there's a shortcut there. I had no clue that was there, and I would be like, okay, I'll use that from now on. But other things, I'm like, yeah, I'm not doing that. But it's the same thing for everything. It's just the way that we can learn new ideas and think through things. And it's not really pertaining to legacy per se, but I think that we get real closed off with learning new things just in general. We're not. It's really interesting. We live in this age of like more information, more conversation, more podcasts, there's like 100 billion podcasts out there. And you can find something that agrees with everything that you want to say. That's why one of the things I'm not recommending per se some podcasts, but I listen to a lot of pods like with people that I don't agree with just because I'm interested in what they think on certain things. Or, I think Rogan's a good example, his podcast, because you can find episodes like the Wes Huff episode where they're talking about the Bible, and it's he's a Bible scholar. He seems very sound in it, and he's talking about things that generally align with the faith, and they're not like some new revelation that he's finding places. And so you could pigeonhole yourself and like, I'm only going to listen to that one. But you miss the Dawkins episode because he's an atheist, and it's like, okay, well, what did he have to say? Like what was his reasoning? What was his thought? And I think for a believer, one, you don't listen to it with well, maybe he's right. Like you listen to it with a mindset of, how do they think about this? Like what is the argument against my faith? Most of the time when you hear them, your faith is strengthened because you're like, well, that's not true. Paul said this is where it comes from. He's manipulating a scripture. He's not reading a scripture or certain things. And so you start to look at those things and you can learn a lot from that type of thing.
Well, what I was thinking is I think it has a lot to do with legacy, because if your legacy is one way now and you never change, you never open up, you never break those gates to learn new information and to be better because of that, your legacy is not changing. You're going to have the same legacy as you did beforehand. Yeah. So that's the way I was relating it to is, if you're living this way now and you're like, I'm not leaving a good legacy for anybody, it's not useful. It's not something people are going to remember in a good way, in a positive way. If you never break that barrier of learning things and saying, well, maybe their way of thinking is not completely wrong. Maybe they do know what they're talking about. Maybe they're actually digging into their Bible and they're like, well, that little piece of nugget, like you were saying, that's a useful information. Let me actually use that, take it into my life, and build a better legacy because of what they said and change my mind on them. So, yeah,
it's true. Because if you've already established a statue in your own mind that you can't break down, then whatever you are is what people are going to know you as. I wrote something or put something out somewhere. I was talking about, most of the time when we hear men being described as pillars of the community, it's whenever they've taken an axe to the pillar that they had established and that they're on trial for something, or that they've been arrested for something, or they've had some moral failure. It's rare to hear someone be described as a pillar of the community who's still doing good things. A lot of times that verbiage is used like, oh, they were great. They were a great person for the community. They were great for the kids. They were great for this or that, or they gave so much money to this, but they screwed up. And that's when we normally hear it. That person's legacy was he was a great person until he did X, Y, or Z. But that's because, in our mind, he's this one thing. We are always changing and learning, or we should be. And so being open to new ideas, and I think it's good. And, I think it's interesting from a faith perspective. I like to listen to lots of different preachers' take on certain things. Yeah. And a lot of times, you're like, you missed.
Yeah.
But sometimes you're like, oh, that's good.
No.
Yeah. That's a great
100%.
analogy. I'm taking that.
Yeah, 100% agree. I was listening to Pastor Craig this week at his church, and he was talking about the power of doubt. And I was like, if you're doubting, you shouldn't be doubting ever. But I'm like, people doubt. People do doubt their faith. And so he was talking about how you can use that to make your faith even stronger. And you're like, well, I got through that doubt, so I can help other people get. So it made me shift my mind a lot about the power of doubt and how it's not always a bad thing if you have a little bit of doubt, because people out there in the world, they have a little bit of doubt. And if you were able to overcome that through your Bible study, your prayer, and like you can help other people as well. And so made me change my perspective on it because I was open and let the gate open a little bit.
And open up the window.
Open up. No.
Let the light.
No, don't do that.
Inside joke.
That church. If you go to that church, Sherwood, you'll know what we're talking about.
Inside joke. What do you want your legacy to be?
Me? Or the general population of Pointman?
No, you.
Me.
Like, what do you want if you had to give an elevator pitch to someone about you and what you desire your legacy to be when you're gone, what do you want it to be?
I've thought about this a lot, and I want people to say that guy he had a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, and I know it without a shadow of a doubt. When they see me, I want them to say, well, there's no question in my mind he's going to church on Sunday. That's not he's going to be at church. If he's able to, he's not sick or throwing up, or his kids aren't sick or throwing up, they're going to be at church. I want them to know that I followed Christ. I had a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. I don't want people to be at my funeral and say, I don't really know.
Maybe. Yeah.
He might have. So hopefully, he called on the name of the Lord at one point in his life. I want people to be like, he followed Christ no matter what. He's not getting to heaven right now, and he's not getting turned away because he was a guy who followed Christ. I want people to know that for sure. And I want to leave the legacy of I was a good influence on people, and I helped people more than I hurt people. I want people to be like, well, he was actually a good guy. I think a lot of it comes from like my want for people to like me. I know it's not always the great thing, but I want people to be like, he was a good guy because he did good things, but also he had a good relationship with Jesus. And I know that without a shadow of a doubt. And that he tried to teach his family that same way. And I want to be known, for some reason, I never thought of myself as a good leader, ever. And I want to be able to remember as like, this guy helped people as a leader, and he didn't just try to build himself up as a leader. That's what, those are the things I think I want to leave as a legacy.
It's good.
Yeah. How about you?
It's very good. Legacy's tough. I don't care if people like me. No, I'm just kidding. I think everybody cares a little bit. I
think mine's more, it'll hurt me more than it helps me for people to like me. Yeah. I want people to like me more than I should, was what I was saying.
Yeah.
Not a good thing.
I got you.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've taken the test. We know where you're at.
Yeah.
I think I want to be remembered as someone who left no stone unturned, in like every aspect of my life. Like I want my kids to not question that I was a dad. I want my ministry to not question if I did everything I could to reach lost people. Personally, he was someone who tried everything, did everything, and tried to the best of his ability to experience everything. I think that's really it. It's just, I think the legacy I leave behind is that he was just willing to do what it took, in every aspect. And so it's exhausting, but I think it's, when we start to pare it down into the food groups of life, if you will, it's like, what did he not do that he could have reached someone with the gospel? What did he not do? I want those things to be very small.
Yeah. Talking about like the end of Schindler's List that we're talking about?
Oh, I don't remember it.
You know what I'm talking about? I hate, you guys know what I'm talking about, but like the end of Schindler's List where he's like, the story.
I know the story.
Yeah. Where he's like, he's got all the Jewish people out of the way of getting killed. And he's like, at the end, he's like, these are all the people that you were able to get out and save after the war was over. And he was like, yeah, but I could have sold this ring, for these many more lives, or I sort of could have sold this car. I feel like that's kind of your legacy. You want to be like Schindler.
I don't know. I haven't thought about it that way. I think it's just more. It goes further than like not wanting to leave life without regret. It's more like, did you empty the tank, and was it enough?
Yep.
And I think that's what I think of, and I get convicted by it greatly if I find myself being lazy for a season of life. It's like, nah, like we got stuff to do, dude. Like get off the couch, get going. We got things to record. We got stuff to write down. We got things to read. Like we don't have time to waste. And so I think that's what I would hope that, my kids see, and I hope that's something they aspire to. as well, that they're willing to do everything it takes to do what, God has asked them to do, and that they're willing to do the work that he's asked them to do.
Yeah, that's good.
So I think that's a legacy that I've never really thought about it.
I said, you said it to me, and I was like, on the spot, like, man, I don't. But I think I said what I believe I want my legacy to be. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's an interesting thought. It's not something that you think of. I mean, I think it's something that people, as they get really old, generally start to think about, like, what was my legacy?
Like after you turn 30.
But, well, I meant like when you're knocking on heaven's door.
Yeah. Well, at that point, it's cemented.
Yeah, it's retrospective.
Yep.
It's like, what was it? Yeah, I think we have the luxury of prayerfully time. You never know, but that you have a chance to establish it and go after creating the legacy that you desire, or that God desires through you. More importantly, we can be selfish with our legacy, and we can fall into, I just want to win everything. And I mean, in some instances, Michael Jordan, what's his legacy?
Being a good baller.
He won everything.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what his legacy is. And outside of that, I mean, really, he's not known as a great person.
Yeah.
As far as I know, I mean, I've never heard the Michael Jordan documentary about his kids loving him, and those sorts of things. I'm sure that he did things for his kids. I'm not disparaging Michael Jordan. I'm just saying, like, when we think of him, his legacy is that he was a great basketball player, and that's really and he sells a lot of shoes.
But like you're saying, if you look from the perspective of his kids, that might be the case.
Yeah, it might be.
Same thing with our kids, and we looking at our parents same way. They live. Your grandparents are, people that you knew in your church or wherever in your life. Like, they left a legacy on you, and you remember those things. We're not Michael Jordan's kids, so
it's true, and they might love him. I don't know. I'm just pointing to what we know.
Yeah,
know of him.
I got you.
And for you, your audience might be your kids, and that might be the only audience that cares at the end of the day. And
your coworkers,
your coworkers, the people you come in close contact with. But at the end of the day, that could be a small group of people, and that's perfectly fine. Yeah. But what was the legacy you left for those people?
For sure.
Yeah, your name doesn't have to be on the side of a shoe to leave a great legacy.
And it probably won't.
Probably won't, unless you just design shoes.
Unless you shop read your name on the side of your shoe.
Air Zax.
They make you jump less.
Yeah. Or they make you bunny hop instead of jump for the rim. But all right, that's legacy. Let's think about it. Think about what you desire your legacy to be. Yeah. Along with making a list of how the things that you're falling short of to achieve it. We just did that exercise of identifying our own, and really, it's not something that you sit down and think a lot about. I think when we think about it selfishly generally. But what do you honestly think God desires for your life to be? What do you think that he desires for you to do with your life, so that when you leave, what you leave behind is a legacy worth talking about, and worth thinking about, worth remembering? I think it's important. I think it's a good exercise to think through that. We're actually going to build a devotional guide that goes along with this episode. It'll be a 5-day devotional guide. And so you'll be able to download that, hopefully in the links below. If not, you can head over to that.church, /spacebar, man, not literally spacebar, hit the spacebar.
Spaceman.
Yeah, hit the spacebar. Point Spaceman on Facebook, and it'll definitely be up there when the episode drops. But we'd love for you to follow along, comment, subscribe. Let us know what you think. Let us know if you have any questions about legacy, any biblical examples you want us to take a look at. Maybe we could tackle them at a future date. Yeah. And we hope that you'll join us for the next semester of Pointman.
Yeah, it's going to be good.
April. It's coming in April. And there's going to be some new stuff coming out for ways that you can get involved with Pointman and be on this journey of reaching men everywhere with us. And so with that, we'll see you next week.